Thank you very much, Gaurav. So we have the unenviable task of talking about energy at a point in today's day where energy may start to be flagging for many hours of really rich presentations by our colleagues. And we're going to throw a lot of data at you guys, but we're going to try to keep it exciting. I think some of the numbers we're going to be showing you might surprise, might shock. Some hopefully will inspire you to action, and hopefully all of them will inform you. So when we talk about energy in Dalberg, we're really talking about two broad impact agendas, and we're going to touch on both. One is around access to energy for people who don't have it around the globe. So really it's the SDG 7 agenda, and how do we push towards that as quickly as possible. And the second pillar of a lot of our energy work is around just energy transitions and energy sector decarbonization. So kind of more macro energy sector work. So we'll hit a few highlights on both, and then we'll talk about a few cross-cutting opportunities that excite us and hopefully create some opportunities for those in the audience as well. So let's start with access to energy. So, I mean, the broad headline here is we're off track to SDG 7, but it's not out of reach. So some good news and some bad news. So maybe let's start with the good news. The good news is that we've made immense progress. So if you look from 2010 to 2023, and this is kind of hot off the press. We just launched with the World Bank the Global Off-Grid report in Nairobi a week ago, and so you're seeing some of these pages. So massive progress, and a lot of that progress has been driven by people using off-grid energy. So Gaurav and I stood on a stage a lot like this one 15 years ago, and we were talking about very excitedly that close to 1 million people are using off-grid solar as an energy solution, even as grid and mini grid and other things are growing. But there's an interesting tech innovation and business opportunity. 15 years later, there are 560 million. This is as of 2023, 560 million people in the developing world in the global south using solar off-grid to power their homes. So that's great. That's the good news. The bad news is, well, first of all, this is households. And when you look at productive use, access to energy for SMEs, access to energy for public institutions, the picture is not fantastic. When you look at access to clean cooking energy for a lot of these same households, you don't see a curve like this. It has not progressed as much as many people have hoped. But the other piece of not so great news is that based on our projections, based on where the grid is going, based on where mini grids are going, and based on the trends in the off-grid energy sector, we're kind of stuck in the business as usual scenario. We're not going to hit SDG 7 based on current business models, current levels of funding. So something needs to change. So why are we stuck, or what has been holding us back? So on the off-grid side, a few things. So COVID was definitely a setback to the off-grid sector. Even after kind of a recovery post-COVID, some really big headwinds for off-grid. So currency fluctuation, but major currency depreciation in a number of the markets where a lot of off-grid households are based. Soaring inflation and high interest rates in terms of the ability of households and businesses for businesses to access working capital, for households to access financing. But really the scarier, the more concerning obstacle is here. And that is that we have picked a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and we're really starting to hit the affordability barrier. Always been a challenge, but we're really starting to hit it now. So 51% of the unelectrified, even when you're talking about tier 1, which is kind of the most basic off-grid energy product, 51% of households cannot afford it. 27% can afford it at a stretch, but it means major trade-offs with other things that they could be expending their household budget on. A lot of these people live in fragile contexts, countries, or remote regions, and 200 million of these people are living in places that are active conflict zones. And as we know, in the MENA region, that number is growing. And that has really important implications, right? A lot of these people are in fragile and conflict zones, and it's 57% more expensive to deliver these kinds of products in those kinds of contexts. So the affordability bar is even higher beyond other challenges. So that's a challenge. It's also an opportunity. If you kind of think forward to through 2030, roughly 1 billion people that we need to electrify to meet SDG 7. Of those billion people, roughly half, 55%, the least cost solution for electrification will be grids. So lots we need to do still to push grids forward. Only about 3 to 5%, the least cost solution will be mini grids. And for 41%, the least cost solution is going to be off-grid. So that's a 400 million person market and opportunity. Not an easy one, right? A lot of these people are in places that are not so easy to reach. They're not necessarily in the big urban and peri-urban areas where in places that are stable. Some are, but many aren't. There's opportunity around productive use. So if you think about MSMEs and SMEs of the type that Kusi and my colleagues Kusi and Alex were just talking about, if you think about the smallholder farmers that Sandra was talking about before the break, that's a major opportunity. Productive use, off-grid as a productive use energy solution for that segment. And then there is a social infrastructure segment, schools, clinics, hospitals, many of which are unelectrified in the global south. So what do we need to get there? Well, we do need money, and we need a lot more money than has been flowing to the sector thus far. So actually part of the good news is that markets and tech innovation have actually unlocked a lot of opportunity. So billions of dollars flowing into off-grid in the last 10 years. But the pace of funding required is substantial to reach SDG 7. So by 2030, we need $21 billion just as for household electrification with off-grid, those 400 million households. And that means 3 to 4 billion annually. For productive use, that's about 74 billion. So we're talking about 100 billion across those two, and a few billion this is actually in many ways a low-hanging fruit, but a difficult commercial opportunity, getting clinics and getting schools electrified. Really important, because if you recall the presentation from our colleagues on education, the kind of AI and what needs that's going to drive in terms of electrification for those institutions are going to rise very quickly. There are a number of other unlocks, but we'll talk about them after we talk a bit about the broader macro energy transition.
Thank you. So to go to energy transitions, there's rightfully a lot of attention on how corporates can decarbonize and on how this looks in industry. We were asked the question from a slightly different angle, working with the UN Sustainable Energy for All, with Google and others, on how to empower consumers towards making sure that every hour of electricity consumption is matched by carbon-free energy sources. Companies like Google have whole teams dedicated to how they can decarbonize their data centers. So it's tempting to think that this movement should be led by companies and by governments. Why empower consumers? Household decisions on electricity, on heating, on cooling make up about 20% or impact about 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The demand side does matter. A lot of the solutions already exist. Many of these concern consumers either reducing their energy consumption directly or finding ways for consumers to come together to indirectly bring more renewables onto the grid. Some of these solutions are about consumers producing their own energy. So, for example, rooftop renewables. Some of these solutions are about getting data for consumers to make better decisions. For example, home energy reports in Malaysia that have helped consumers reduce their energy consumption at home and reduce their costs. Others are about consumers indirectly coming together, for example, in energy cooperatives to reduce their costs and bring more solar onto the grid. And finally, there are also mechanisms to better trade or to price energy. For instance, time of use pricing that takes energy consumption and shifts energy consumption away from peak hours. These solutions are being used around the world, including in lower and middle income countries, but they haven't scaled. What if they did scale? That could amount to 1,100 terawatt hours of energy impacted, of electricity impacted. That's equivalent to 27% of global household electricity consumption. It's a huge number. And the technologies are out there, but what is missing to scale them up are things that require changes to regulation, to incentives, to consumer awareness, to make sure that these solutions can scale. That pathway looks very different across different types of countries. On the country archetypes, you can see on the page, roughly speaking, the left-hand side are countries with lower grid access, and across the right-hand side, countries that are innovating and finding new pathways for renewable energy. The UAE, for example, probably sits more towards the right-hand side of the page, maybe between the third and the fourth, with a really high penetration of smart meters that enable empowerment of consumers, but opportunity to innovate in new areas and new mechanisms like time of use pricing and 24/7 power purchase agreements, where energy suppliers and companies work together to bring more renewables onto the grid. Our work in Access for Energy is really about being able to bring solar energy to people, to children who are studying, to women who are cooking in households where they'd otherwise be using polluting forms of energy, to schools and hospitals to use. For us, the Just Energy Transitions piece is about being able to decarbonize and impact those who are the most vulnerable to climate. Mike and I will come on to some of the conversations that we see as the biggest areas of impact in this space. What if we rethink energy as a public good? No country has ever fully electrified without thinking of energy as a public utility, without a huge role and an important role for subsidy. We've heard from some of our stakeholders in energy access, for example, that major but short-term subsidy programs are somewhere between a band-aid and a sugar high. There's opportunity for more stable, for more thoughtful subsidy, and to make that more tailored and innovative, for example, with end-user subsidies, rather than centering on companies. Within energy transition as well, there's opportunity to think more about energy as a public good. How can we accelerate innovation in business models for energy access and transition? Current business models are not fit for purpose, either to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7 or to decarbonize. There's opportunity to think about business models, for instance, in energy access, where pay-as-you-go models where people pay in installments have delivered a lot. But there's a chance to think about, for instance, energy as a service and to treat off-grid energy as a public good, not as a consumer good. Within energy transition, there are things like battery energy storage technologies and business models that can be innovated that will be much more cost effective and be able to move the dial on the transition.
And two other really important opportunities that we're tracking, and we're seeing a lot of interest from funders trying to do something about these. One is around moving from a supply-led energy model to a demand-led model. We're really breaking the silos between sectors such as energy and agriculture, or energy and health, energy and education. We're often at the phenomenon we're seeing. They're amazing innovators, say in the solar off-grid space. Hundreds of innovators that to develop really productive new solutions, but the path forward cannot be through a solar cooling entrepreneur doing demand agricultural demand aggregation, not right, because demand is not already in, or an energy entrepreneur figuring out how to tap into healthcare or educational budgets, where there's some positions you so as a startup. And so shifting to when people are thinking and also in this relation like this, how do we make sure that they can build that? because this is very, very silent, even within a lot of development institutions. And then lastly, uh, an opportunity around data and artificial intelligence to unlock to me. We're talking about delivering subsidy, a lot of really interesting data and digital infrastructure that can help direct that subsidy and focus it in. We're talking about carbon finance, climate finance, a lot of fermentation, but lots of really interesting new emerging digital infrastructure that can enable that. And lastly, AI and data for decarbonization, for an energy transition plan. We're seeing some really exciting collaboratives of partners around this. And so it's a real opportunity to engage and move the sector forward.